Imagine you are one of the faithful. You're a devout Catholic with an unshakable faith in God. You're lying in a cold, empty bed, seeing visions, bleeding sweet, perfume-scented blood, feeling agonizing pain in your hands, your feet, your side, and your head. Why are you, one of the faithful, suffering, and are you suffering at all? Is this a gift? What's happening to you? This physical experience is known as stigmata. But what is stigmata, and does it really exist at all, or are people imagining everything? Today I will explain what the term stigmata means, then I will discuss the history of stigmata. Next, I will give examples of famous stigmatics, which are people who have experienced the phenomena. And finally, I will analyze the arguments against stigmata. First, stigmata is defined as bodily marks, sores, or sensations of pain in locations corresponding to the crucifixion wounds of Jesus Christ. Stigmata is considered supernatural because it defies medical explanation. Usually when people are bleeding the blood, it is more brightly colored than what you normally see. The blood usually defies gravity, which means like it'll flow in a direction not always downward. It can flow upward. It's not normal. And sometimes, like I mentioned in my introduction, the blood can smell sweet, like perfume or lavender or jasmine. Causes of stigmata are well recognized by the Roman Catholic Church, and in fact the Vatican they send out priests to investigate the claims, and they are the ones to decide whether it's stigmata or not. So every time you hear of a saint, which I'll mention later, Saint Francis of Assisi, they're the ones who declare them a saint because of what they've experienced. Most stigmatics are female. There are rare cases where they are male. I'll talk about them later as well, but most stigmatics are female. The signs of stigmata, as mentioned earlier, include bleeding hands and feet, a bleeding forehead, pain in the side, and pain in the back. These represent the 5 sacred wounds of Jesus Christ. And I know my picture's small, but here's a picture of Jesus on the cross. And he had the crown of thorns, which explains the bleeding on the head. He was nailed by his hands and by his feet, which explains the bleeding on the hands and the feet. He was whipped on his back on the way to the cross, which explains why they have scratches on their backs. And then finally, he received a spear through his side, which explains why people bleed in their sides. Few stigmatics, however, experience all 5 wounds at once. Usually, most stigmatics only experience a few symptoms. This stigmatic here, she's a woman. She is bleeding from her head. And here's another picture of her bleeding from her head. And they also bleed from their hands. So, not everybody. Most people usually don't experience all 5 symptoms. Now that we know what stigmata is, let's look at its history. The earliest cases of stigmata date back to the 13th century. After the first reported case, more than 20 additional cases of stigmata were reported. Over 300 cases were reported at the end of the 19th century, and at the end of the 20th century, over 500 cases have now been reported. More and more ordinary people have been experiencing stigmata, which means that not just Roman Catholics are experiencing it now, which they're finding it really bizarre because according to what the Roman Catholic Church says, only devout Roman Catholic believers can experience it. One interesting theory is that there will always be at least 12 stigmatics in the world corresponding to the 12 disciples of Jesus Christ. And research suggests that ever since the first reported instance of stigmata, this has roughly been the case. Now that we've observed the occurrence of stigmata in history, let's look at examples of famous stigmatics. There have been many reported cases of stigmata throughout history, but only a few have been accepted by the Roman Catholic Church. The first well-documented case, and the first to be accepted by the Roman Catholic Church, according to Laborga Cazzoli, an essayist of mystical stigmata and correspondent to Translations Online, is Saint Francis of Assisi. He first experienced stigmata in Laverna, Italy, in 1224. He had a vision of an angel boring holes into his body, but no one knew of his ailments while he was alive. They found out because his friend admitted to the church after he passed away that he saw him. He saw the wounds coming. He saw them himself. The second most famous case is that of Padre Pio. He's more famous, he's more well known, and in fact, he was, I believe, one of the first people, first stigmatics to, the media showed his wounds. He tried to hide them, but eventually he couldn't hide it anymore, and in pictures I will show you later, you could see it on his hands when he's preaching, and people flocked to him. He first experienced stigmata on September 20th, 1918. According to the Padre Pio Foundation of America, a group of priests and believers dedicated to studying Padre Pio's case, Padre Pio said this: "It all happened in a flash. While all this was taking place, I saw before me a mysterious person similar to the one I had seen on August 5th, differing only because his hands, feet, and side were dripping blood. I thought I would die. The sight of him frightened me, and what I felt at that moment is indescribable. I would have died if the Lord hadn't intervened and strengthened my heart that I felt would burst out of my chest. The person disappeared, and I became aware that my hands, feet, and side were pierced and dripping with blood. Padre Pio experienced unbelievable pain for the next 50 years of his life, and visible marks for the next 50 years as well. Like I said, the media has pictures and videos of him giving sermons and speeches with, bandages wrapped around his hands. He tried, like I said, to keep the wounds hidden from the media, but 50 years is a long time to hide something like that. It's interesting, and it defies medical explanation because his wounds never became infected. That's not scientifically possible that over 50 years you have open wounds and never once did they become infected. Padre Pio's wounds also disappeared when he passed away. All his wounds disappeared. He had no scars on his body. So as soon as he passed away, they just disappeared. Padre Pio died in 1968 and was declared a saint on June 16, 2002. Now that we have looked at past and recent examples of stigmatics, let's look at the arguments against stigmata. How is it not existing? Although many cases are reported and the Roman Catholic Church recognizes the existence of stigmata, there are many arguments against the legitimacy of the claims. For example, there have been historical stigmatics who have admitted to faking the wounds that they received, either by self-infliction or, I'll explain, there's a psychological disorder that can explain that as well. But according to Herbert Thurston, a writer for the Catholic Encyclopedia of the New Advent, one famous example is Magdalena de la Cruz. She was a Franciscan nun from Cordoba, Spain, and she claimed to have experienced stigmata in the 16th century, and they even hailed her as a saint. But eventually, after they hailed her as a saint, she comes out saying that I faked it, I did this myself, and she was put in prison where she died. So it is possible that these wounds could be self-inflicted, but that's where the Vatican comes in and investigates to make sure that, this is supernatural. Further evidence is that the wounds have occurred in different places on the body. For example, if you ever see pictures of Jesus Christ on a cross, you'll notice that in some pictures he's pierced on his palms, in some he's pierced on his wrists. Now, if stigmata were real, then it would occur in the same place every time. For example, like a headache. A headache is a headache because it always occurs in your head. Now, if you get an ache in your foot, it's no longer a headache anymore. It becomes something different. So to say that stigmata, when someone's pierced in the hands or palm, regardless of stigmata, it doesn't make sense. It should occur in the same place every time. Furthermore, there's a psychological explanation for the experience. According to the University of Michigan Health System, an educational site designed to give accurate health information, the psychosomatic explanation states that the mind can have physical effects on the body, such as when a person undergoing stress loses their hair, or if you're panic attacks, you shake and you can pass out. Stigmatics could be people that are so obsessed with their thoughts that their thoughts affect their body and you receive bodily injury because of what you think. So it's mind over body. And also, no other cases have been reported before the 13th century. It's odd that stigmata started occurring when Jesus Christ, depictions of Jesus became popular in modern art. So it's easier to claim you've experienced stigmata once you've seen a picture of it than if someone said, I'm experienced the wounds of Jesus Christ, but no one's ever painted a picture of it. So it's odd that as soon as it's been depicted in modern art, the people just started experiencing it. Why couldn't it have occurred in the 11th or 12th century? Why did it just start occurring not closer to when Jesus had first been crucified? In conclusion, I've discussed what stigmata is, the history of stigmata, famous stigmatics, and logical arguments against stigmata. The next time you hear a case of stigmata, remember the information you learned here and decide for yourself. Is this a case of religious miracle or just a hoax? And has the evidence pointed you to believe in the phenomena, or are the arguments against it more persuading? Next time you hear about it, you decide.